This Hangout on air is live, everybody. Week 5. Woo, we got a lot to talk about in week 5 with Dr. Gene Bramall, with Matt Waldman. But before we do that, I got to make sure to tell you that, whether you've been riding high like Patrick Mahomes or you've been dragging it along like Josh Allen, well, we got you covered. Week 5, we teamed up with DraftKings, a huge fantasy contest this weekend. Which cheapo wide receiver is going to be the key to your lineup? It's maybe not Kiki Cutie, maybe Taywan Taylor, maybe Traquan Smith. Well, pick that receiver right and play free for a share of $1.7 million with a first deposit of $5 or more at DraftKings. First place wins $100,000. Just draft a full lineup of players and watch your team shoot up the leaderboard. Make sure you get all of your picks in by 1 p.m. Eastern today, Sunday, October 7th. Go to dkng.co/football guys to draft your lineup. Again, that's dkng.co/football guys. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for more details. Lots and lots of details that we need to go through here, Doc. Gene, let's start with Green Bay. We know we're not going to see Randall Cobb. What about Devontae Adams? What about Geronimo Allison?
Sounds like Adams is going to play. When we talked Thursday night, I guess it was, I thought that Adams was the most likely of the three to play because I didn't see Allison having too much of a chance to go. And then Mike McCarthy said that they were at least hopeful. But he didn't practice at all this week, didn't do anything on the Packers Saturday practice. He's still listed as questionable, but he's not going to play. He did clear protocol. He hasn't done any football-related activity yet, so I don't expect him to play. Adams is a little bit of a more difficult call. It really seems like the injury happened on Wednesday, didn't do much on Thursday, then came back and was able to do some things on Saturday, at least enough to where every overnight indication was that he was going to play. And there's not been a lot of discussion about him being limited in any way, but calf injuries are difficult for wide receivers. Rocking back off that line to get some explosion off the snap, separation, jumping, all of those things are pretty important for the calf muscle to do. And Mike McCarthy already earlier in the week was telling reporters that they felt like they were maybe using Adams too much. He's played almost every single snap through the first 4 games of the year, averaging 70 snaps a game. And they were already planning to limit him a little bit. But no Randall Cobb, no Geronimo Allison. Are they going to be able to do that with a bunch of rookies and really only Jimmy Graham and the running backs there? So I don't know. I'm interested to hear what you guys think about that. It sounds like Adams is going to play. My guess is he's not going to play close to 95% of the snaps as he's done before. Is it going to be a high leverage situation? Is it going to be where they see how he feels during the first couple of drives and then let him go? How high is the risk of aggravation? I don't think we have enough information to know, but I think it's reasonable to expect Adams to see fewer snaps, fewer targets than usually would. But with Aaron Rodgers throwing you the ball, I think if Adams is in the starting lineup and you don't hear anything too concerning about him in pregame warm-ups here soon, then I think you just go ahead and put him in your lineup and hope for the best.
Yeah, I do think you have to play an active Adams, even with the potential of Darius Slay on him in this NFC North showdown. Matt, a lot of angles on this game. Ziggy Ansah also still out for this one. Let's just dispense of the Detroit angle. And Gene, since we're on this game, Marvin Jones. 2 weeks ago, I think he was added late to injury report. He was fine. Should we assume a repeat of that this week?
Yeah, I think so. This looks very similar to what happened in week 3. The Lions have been seemingly letting their veterans and key offensive and defensive players rest on Fridays instead of on Wednesdays and Thursdays early in the week, or at least that's when they're limiting their practice participation. Last week, we saw the same thing with Golden Tate and his hip, Gerard Davis and his knee. Both of those players played their normal snap counts. Gerard Davis played every single snap. Golden Tate played more snaps last week than he had the 2 or 3 weeks previous. So there's some indication for me in Rappaport overnight that, again, Marvin Jones' injury doesn't seem to be significant. In week 3, we heard that Jones was, maybe they were a little bit concerned about him and they were going to watch him all the way up to game time. He played almost every snap in that game. I think he's going to be fine. There's not been anything to make me think otherwise.
Okay, lots of angles here, Matt. I'm not going to ask you about Marvin Jones versus Kenny Golladay, but I will ask you just very briefly because quarterback, as the rising tide of quarterback stats and wide receiver stats for that matter, bulk up our fantasy points every week, they are making quarterback decisions harder. So let's look at the quarterback decisions in this game first. And really, you can just go like the classic, like cold, cool, lukewarm, warm, hot. Because, and really, this is almost like a two-parter with Matthew Stafford. Because on one hand, you have Stafford and his three receivers. Green Bay, not really a scary defense, although they did come together against Josh Allen last week. But counterbalancing that is a rational coaching argument for Kerryon Johnson to get the ball like 30 times today in a key divisional matchup. Maybe the answer could be both, but what's the pick to click here between Kerryon Johnson breakout game and Matthew Stafford out-dueling a shorthanded Aaron Rodgers? Where are a lot of the offensive stats going to fall for Detroit today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to look somewhere between Alex Smith and Kirk Cousins in terms of how they matched up against the Packers this past year. I mean, this year so far, because Cousins had 425 yards and 4 touchdowns. Alex Smith had 220 yards and 2 touchdowns. You can forget about Trubisky and Allen because they're basically in the same class of player, depending on how the offense plays and the defense that they're facing. So when you're looking at it from that perspective, I think that I would not be betting on Kerryon Johnson getting the ball 30 times. I do believe that he can be a guy that can give you 20 touches, and you would feel pretty comfortable with that. So that puts him in the range of top 15 running backs at that stage. At the same time, when you look at Matthew Stafford, I just think that, yes, this is a pretty good young defense, and they have some nice players, but they're not all going to match up with everybody on the field in the way that you would expect, or that you would hope for if you're a Lions fan. So I think that this is a situation where Matthew Stafford is probably in that 280-yard range, probably a couple of touchdowns, and you can look at it and maybe even a rushing touchdown, something in that range where you can have 2 to 3 touchdowns. And he will outduel Aaron Rodgers, I think, in this particular game, just because I don't think Aaron Rodgers has much to work with other than maybe Jimmy Graham. And when you look at what the Lions have allowed, I don't think that this is a game where Alex Smith is going to, break out and have a huge day.
Yeah, Aaron Rodgers, what's interesting is all the stuff, I don't know, Matt, if you've seen the stuff about Mike McCarthy saying, our relationship's fine, our relationship's fine, our relationship's fine. And it's funny, it was almost like Mike McCarthy was speaking to the fantasy community because he talked about how, well, last week, he was like the secretariat with the bit in his mouth, and he didn't want me to pull on the reins, but I did. And in the second half, we just didn't want to expose him to, it was there, but we were ahead and we wanted to run the ball. And in the first half, and he was explaining why Aaron Rodgers didn't really get to air it out last week, although I saw some passes that Aaron Rodgers dismissed. So, leading into that, we did see on Thursday night Andrew Luck without T.Y. Hilton. He did have Eric Ebron, who accounted for a lot of stats, but Andrew Luck was fine, even though he had nothing. But Andrew Luck didn't have Aaron Jones. It's almost like the similar question as about Kerryon Johnson. It's rational coaching, though. It's Detroit's run defense, who reconfirmed for us last week that they're terrible. Is this a week that you make hard decisions to find a way to get Aaron Jones in your lineup?
No, because I think the difference in that is that the Cowboys desperately need Ezekiel Elliott to stay afloat. I think that, you look at a team like Green Bay, and while it would be not, your whole bit about secretariat with the bit in his mouth, I think that explanation for anything is more because that's him trying to talk through, this is the dysfunctional, mom or dad at the family gathering, not having a discussion with their child, but trying to have it with them through the rest of their family in public, as opposed to when they should have done it somewhere else.
I think you can't actually tell him directly, so you have to tell the beat writer who puts it out there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened, because when you look at, think about last year and Aaron Rodgers coming back, and this team was running the ball from the I formation a heck of a lot, and they were using that because of Brett Hundley. And while that worked at certain points, you would think that they would have melded the two. They play Carolina, and it's like, forget the run game. We're just going to spread it out, and it's all Aaron Rodgers all the time. And he lost that game for them. If you really look at it, threw multiple interceptions in that game. He was not very good. He got fans excited because a not very good Aaron Rodgers is better than a good day for Brett Hundley. But that's the type of thing that we're seeing here. So I think they're going to run a little bit more to Aaron Jones. He's the right pick. It's just whether or not he's the right pick that you want to wedge in there as a top 15 back. And I'd say if you can fit him in as your third running back, or if you just have or it's an easy pick for your second running back based on your lineup, go ahead and do that. But I would not necessarily look at your lineup and say, if you have Adrian Peterson against the Saints and you have Aaron Rodgers against against Detroit, or Aaron Jones against Detroit, well, logical explanation would be Aaron Jones. But I think based on usage and based on just when you look based on usage and not on rational coaching, but based on what's really happening, you probably still go with Adrian Peterson, even though that seems like a tough choice.
Is there a clever pivot play with Adams likely locked up with Darius Slay, with no Allison, with no Cobb? Is it the biggest game of the year yet for Jimmy Graham? Is it Marcus Valdez-Scantling? Is it Ty Montgomery? Is it Ty Montgomery in a role where he's a crack filler in an offense that needs help, and he catches kind of like Nyheim Hines on Thursday night? He catches 7, 8, 9 passes, and it gets used more fully to his ability, even with Aaron Jones or Jamal Williams. Is there somebody else in the Green Bay offense that's going to step up this week?
The only one that I really think about is Jimmy Graham, and he's the one that I'm most bullish on and putting in there because he's already in the lineups, he's already getting play, and they're only getting stronger in that regard. I would like to think Ty Montgomery could be that. I'll defer to you on that one and say that if that's something that you're thinking, that's great, because I look at this offense and I think about Marcus Valdez-Scantling. I mean, I think in 2 to 3 years he could be a plus version of Quincy Enunwa, and we'll be talking about him more. But this year, I think, I just look at Rodgers, and it's kind of like he's okay with guys who are some veterans or who are young guys who are playing decently, but when they're not playing decently, he's like that temperamental chef in the kitchen that we hear about, who's like cursing out everybody and and throwing plates everywhere and basically telling them that their food isn't worth a darn, and that culinary school didn't do them very well. And I think that I just don't see some of these young guys really stepping up into a big way this year, this year. He doesn't seem even very happy with them right now. And it's like, isn't this a time where you want to encourage your young players to do well? I'm interested to see whether or not he's that kind of leader or not.
Yeah, this matchup seems to be teed up for the Detroit Lions at home, but they're the Detroit. So it's going to be like Aaron Rodgers throwing touchdown passes to Lance Kendricks to win this game or something. I don't know.
Or Aaron, or we having this conversation this time next week, is Aaron Rodgers okay? And the answer will be yes. He just didn't have surrounding talent around.
Yeah, we'll see. I do think Aaron Rodgers, I have already penned in my head the paragraph for Aaron Rodgers in the buy low column next week. Gene, the buy low window for Joe Mixon is closed. However, Marvin Lewis, who usually doesn't tell us anything, had to tell us something to make us feel hesitant, or maybe not. Should we feel hesitant at all to play Joe Mixon this week? It looks like it's a great matchup, but what's this setback or conditioning? What?
No, I don't think conditioning is an issue. I think it's reasonable to expect that a player who has not done anything in game conditions in 3 weeks, missed a couple of games in practice there, isn't in game-ready conditioning. But we've seen him run. He was clear to fully practice. He's been pushing for the medical staff to allow him to do a little bit more than what they wanted to do. Mixon did. They gave him another week just to make certain that there wasn't any lingering pain issues or otherwise. Marvin Lewis was really positive, and that may well be because he knew what was going on with Gio Bernard earlier in the week. But Lewis was positive on Monday. Didn't see anything from Mixon that had anybody concerned. They haven't elevated anybody from the practice squad. It's going to be Mixon and Mark Walton today. And generally, although if you go back to the Rudy Johnson and Cedric Benson and days, as long as Marvin Lewis has been there, they like to have somebody, whether it's Bernard Scott or somebody else, come in and take every third series from the primary running back. And we've seen that a little bit less since Joe Mixon has been given the priority of the carries. We were wondering where Gio Bernard was at times. So although Mark Walton was given, I think he got 7 touches to Gio's 19 or 20. How much of that had to do with his 2-minute drill injury last week? It's added up, that's hard to know. I think we're going to see Mixon get at least 15 touches. I think he could get his ceiling expectation of 20 plus if he's feeling good and his conditioning is right during the game, depending on how that goes. I think you're probably going to see Mark Walton maybe take the 3rd series, and then you'll see what happens after that. So I'm not too worried about Mixon. I'm not too worried about the conditioning. I am a little bit worried that more than one beat writer has suggested that the Bengals may take it a little bit more slowly with Mixon than they had in the past, whether that's them just reading into the situation or them knowing something. After all, we're probably not going to know until after the game. But I don't have too much concern that we're going to see Mixon unexpectedly get like 10 to 12 touches, unless there's an obvious game script issue by which the Bengals are way ahead and they're going to rest Mixon, or they just aren't taking that many offensive snaps for whatever reason. So I don't have too much concern with Mixon today.
Also in this matchup, Matt, we will not see Tyler Eifert. We will not see John Ross. We will likely see Xavier Howard on AJ Green. Is the math's just as simple that Tyler Boyd against Miami's defense, Bobby McCain, I think, is banged up. The winner of their number 2 cornerback derby is hurt, so now they have to go to the runner-up. Is this a 12 catches for 120 yards kind of day for Tyler Boyd against the mess that is Miami?
I mean, it's possible. I think that's his upside for sure. I think if you're looking somewhere between 6 and 8, you're probably being realistic, and that makes him a solid PPR play this week. So I think that's fine, and I agree with Gene that we're looking at probably a 15 to 20 touch day for Joe Mixon, and if Marvin Lewis is talking about him, it's probably more like saying, well, Seabiscuit's got the heavier jockey on him today, so he may not be quite as good as what he was when we brought the substitute in, who was 30 pounds lighter. But that's okay.
Yeah, Miami a mess too with Gene. 3 out of their top 5 defensive ends are out. You can never have enough defensive ends unless you're Miami, and then they all get hurt by week 5. So it's bad.
The South Beach diet.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I don't know what's going to happen when Atlanta comes to Pittsburgh today, because those games, when Atlanta plays Pittsburgh every 4 years, it's usually a pretty intense game. But, Gene, I do know that Devontae Freeman is going to be out there, but should we hesitate to play him in the first week back from one of these knee issues? It wasn't corrected by surgery. It may or may not be a continuation of a knee issue he had last year. How much hesitation does that give us in his first week back?
I don't have much hesitation with Freeman either. It's always hard to know exactly what usage is going to be when there's another capable player like Tevin Coleman on the depth chart as well. But Freeman did more in practice last week than the Falcons expected. There's been all kinds of optimism about his ability to come back this week. He said he's got his old explosiveness back. He doesn't feel like there's any limitation. We've heard the same things from Dan Quinn. So I expect him to get a pre-injury workload right away. He's another player where they gave him an extra week just to make sure that there weren't any pain issues related to the bruise. And although it's possible and maybe likely that a looseness in his knee left over from the ligament sprains that he had at the end of last season contributed to this bone bruise, I don't know that this is close to the same type of thing like a hamstring strain or something like that, to where you would expect him to be at a high risk of aggravating the injury today because of the nature of what was going on. So I think giving him that extra week, watching him in practice, Dan Quinn's comments all make me think that maybe a carry or 2 or a series less than usual for him. But I don't think we're going to see 50% of his pre-injury workload or anything like that. I think he's going to be good to go.
Gene, is it true that the Steelers are going to have a contest today and they're going to pick a ticket at random, and that person is going to play inside linebacker for them?
Yeah, they don't have too much left, do they?
I won.
Yeah. Congratulations. I don't think this is not a matchup where you want to be missing an inside linebacker necessarily.
Yeah, Vince Williams, I think he was doubtful, and he wasn't exactly playing great anyway. He was the incumbent, and maybe we'll see Matthew Thomas. I'm excited about his athleticism and that he stuck as an undrafted free agent. But Matt, well, first, and I think you should be able to answer this quickly. Is there any way that this isn't one of the 2 or 3 highest scoring games of the afternoon? Is there any way this isn't a game that isn't a back and forth, whoever has the ball last kind of game in Pittsburgh today?
No,
No.
not remotely.
So what's our actionable? I mean, does that nudge us to play guys like Mohamed Sanu? I mean, speaking of inside linebackers being out, Austin Hooper, the Steelers, I think, are maybe the worst in the league at defending the tight end so far. Or, maybe a Devontae Freeman on the Steelers side, maybe a Vance McDonald over a tight end that you drafted because of Atlanta's situation at safety, at inside line. They're not going to have Grady Jarrett today. So, is there anybody like really standing out to you as someone you wouldn't normally play, but this week because of the game script here, you're going to get them in?
Maybe James Washington, I think, is an option because I think Juju Smith-Schuster is going to have a huge day against that I don't know, carpet that's red but doesn't really move around very well in the middle of the defense. So I think that yes, on that. I mentioned that and Gene got mad and left us, but I would say that, I think tight end is a decent option to look at there, certainly because of the lack of depth that we're seeing at that position across the league right now. So that's not a bad play if you need one. I just think that the Atlanta's going to be able to run on Pittsburgh, and Freeman being a cutback runner that he is going to be excellent against an over-aggressive Pittsburgh defense, which is kind of, even when they're decent, they tend to be over-aggressive. So you put a new athletic young guy in there like Matthew Thomas, and that could be a whole lot of fun for the running game there. But I just think that, against Atlanta, I think James Washington, I think the tight ends, those guys are good to go. Obviously, James Conner is going to get a lot of reception. So if you're kind of been down on him because of recent statistics, I think you're going to see a bounce back game this week from him as well. So I'd pretty much start everybody with the exception. I mean, Austin Hooper should have a good game. That's rational coaching. But the thing is that Matt Ryan seems to be very cautious with him, even when there are good plays. And I just don't think Matt Ryan is completely comfortable with him yet, which it's 3 years now. It's kind of nutty. Sanu could be that replacement in that regard. This could be a really big Sanu game.
This is going to be a game that makes play callers and anybody who loads up on this game in DFS lineups or you drafted player, you're going to look really smart. This is going to be a score fest. But right up, I think you drive up I-79 and you catch on to I-90 and it turns into the throughway and you can drive from Pittsburgh to Buffalo in I think 4 hours. My brain, maybe even less than that. Tennessee at Buffalo, and we saw the petals of the flower open in the Tennessee offense. Now, this week, we will see Corey Davis likely match up with Tre'Davious White. That means we're going to see Taywan Taylor against, I'm not even sure who's playing slot, who's playing the number 2 corner for Buffalo. Is this another elementary? It looks to me, Matt, like an elementary math equation. And in fact, in the place I play DFS, the prices between Kiki Cutie and Taywan Taylor were very similar, so that I could just flip all of my Cuties shares to Taywan Taylor. Is it just that simple this week? Taywan Taylor breakout week incoming?
I think it's a pretty good bet, mainly because Taylor, he's got some nice after the catch skills. Saw some of that, and obviously he's always a good option in terms of the opportunity for him to go deep and win there. Even though you saw a lot of those deep balls going towards Davis last week, and they were very accurate in terms of the intermediate to deep game. I think both players are going to be very good for the Titans this week. Even though the Bills defense, they were able to limit the Chargers. They were able to, I'd say they were able to limit the Ravens, but then you look at all that 3 of those guys had touchdowns in the opener. So I think what you're looking at is a defense that has talent, that's young, and it makes mistakes. And I think that when you look at it from that perspective, Corey Davis is the type of player that can force a defense to make mistakes. I think when you have different levels concepts that you're using with this particular offense, that forces defense not to communicate very well and make mistakes. So yeah, I would bet on multiple receivers from the Titans offense, and I think Taylor and Davis are it.
Is this a get right game for Derrick Henry just on game script? Is this when he gets to carry number 20 or 21 and breaks the back of the Bills?
Ooh. No, I think this is a Deion Lewis game still. I just don't trust Derrick Henry and this offense at this point. I think that it's funny. You see things that people get proven right about, even though they were dead wrong. I would say that when Paul Kuharski on ESPN talked about his footwork and how bad it was off of the simplicity of one drill that he had never looked at before. And then we had Chad Spann get on here and kind of explain how footwork drills work and what practices look like. And taking one snippet of that is like, totally out of context. But then when you take a look at the decisions that Derrick Henry makes and, the way that he's played at certain times, I'm sure Paul Kuharski, if he were this way, and I don't think he is, I think he's a good journalist. He would probably sit there, if it were somebody else who's kind of a hack and he's not, would probably go, see, I was right, and it's just like off of the basis of the wrong thing. So this is that deal with Derrick Henry at this point.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Although his time will come. And watching Tennessee's offense last week, we really saw that glimpse of what we had hoped for, because even Rashard Matthews, we'll see where he ends up, but Corey Davis breaking out, Taywan Taylor breaking out, he wasn't used much to begin the year. Dion Lewis, I think that Tennessee really appreciates Dion Lewis's talent. The offensive line they have, Marcus Mariota setting up to succeed. As I said, the petals of the flower opening. Matt, you look at Denver's offense. I mean, you got Cortland Sutton, and Demaryius Thomas looks okay. He doesn't look like an old man version of Demaryius Thomas. And Emmanuel Sanders and Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman looks good. The first guy never brings him down. And Case Keenum isn't even playing that badly. Is this offense going to go going? Should we be mentioning Bill Musgrave with a bit of derision, or saying, like, what's wrong? Why aren't you bringing the pieces of this together? Today against the Jets, Broncos do have to travel east on a short week after a bitter loss, but Trumaine Johnson is out. The Jets defense is, after that great first week they had against the Lions, we're seeing that this is a mortal defense. Do you have an angle on the Broncos, or is this going to be a disappointing road loss that gets the Chad Kelly drumbeat going even more?
Yeah, I think we're going to be hearing more in the media about Chad Kelly. I just don't think that Case Keenum's playing particularly well. And I think that's more the cause than it is the offense. I mean, I think Cecil did a good job of breaking down some plays this week on Facebook, showing how Keenum did a lot of things right all the way up until he had to throw the ball. It was like he was able to set up the open man. He was able to create space to throw the ball. And then when he threw it, the ball just did not come out the way it needed to come out, and in pivotal situations. And I think what's going on with Case Keenum is that the 3 to 4 or the 4 to 6 plays that really define the difference between a guy who can start in the NFL and a guy who you want to be starting in the NFL, those 4 to 6 plays were bouncing the right way for him last year. They're not bouncing the right way for him this year. And usually that can equate to anywhere between 80 to 100 yards in receptions and, a touchdown or two in a game, depending on how great it is in terms of him being able to hit a man. So, yeah, I'm not excited about it. I think the run game is where you want to stick with in this particular situation. Emmanuel Sanders is always a good option because he's the one he has the most rapport with. And then with Cortland Sutton and Demaryius Thomas, it's really about desperation, big play, decent chance to do something. So if you need to stick somebody in there, you go with one of those options, but they're not going to get as many high leverage touches as you're going to look for. Whereas with Sanders, it's like, him and Case Keenum have such good rapport. It's almost like a magic show, even though Case Keenum hasn't played great. So that's where I'm at. Yeah,
and we saw last week Buster Screen. The screen door was open for D.D. Westbrook. I think our man Eric Stoner, you got some stealth Eric Stoner content at Football Guys doing our Jaguars and Rams recaps. I think he called like death by 1,000 shallow crosses or something like that. And Emmanuel Sanders can take those shallow crosses and turn them into deep gains. So yeah, Emmanuel Sanders might be the pick to click, but in the background, I mean, it kind of a la Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes. If Chad Kelly does get a chance, do we see there was more meat on the bone all along in this offense? Gene, welcome back. Meat, as far as speaking of meat on the bone, some tender meat on the bones of Kiki Cutie and Will Fuller. And as we talked about before we came on, we were going into Sunday night thinking Will Fuller was the guy that we should be wary of plugging in our lineup, but maybe all along it was Kiki Cutie or both, and this affects Sean Watson and Sunday night. Oh, help me.
Yeah, I'm still not convinced we shouldn't be a little bit leery about Will Fuller, based on what we heard last week. And even though he's been back to practice all week, but there seems to be a lot of optimism that his hamstring injury that kept him from running the route tree and even getting into the game in a close divisional situation against the Colts last week wasn't as big of an issue on Wednesday and Thursday. So it sounds like he's going to be able to go. He's the healthiest of the question marks between Kiki Kuti and Lamar Miller, who's way more doubtful than probable, I think, at this point. But Kuti was kind of surprising because he has been listed on the injury report, and you thought that, well, maybe the reason he wasn't on the active roster was because Bruce Ellington was healthy, and then the minute Ellington went on injured reserve, Kuti played almost every snap last week, didn't seem to have any limitations, back on the injury report kind of in the same way he was in the previous weeks, and there wasn't any indication from the local beat writers, Aaron Wilson chief among them, that suggested that there was an issue with him. So it was a little bit surprising to hear that he was, quote, a legit game time decision from Ian Rappaport overnight. And that puts you in a really, really difficult situation with a Sunday night game coming up. So I still have some concern about Will Fuller with a hamstring injury that didn't allow him to do what he needed to do last week. The type of player who needs to really be able to open up and get to top speed on some of the routes he wants to run for Deshaun Watson. Still, obviously, at risk of aggravation. He missed multiple weeks during the preseason and week one as well. Played a couple of weeks and then come back and had a little bit of an issue. So we always talk about these aggravation type situations being a concern. So maybe he just felt a little bit of tug and it ended up not being anything and he's good to go tonight. But not so much where I say take him out of the lineup, but I think there's reason. I'm hopeful that we're not talking about him next week. Let's just put it that way.
By the way, just a quick update. Diana Rossini from ESPN, who's usually her information is very, very good, is also reporting that Joe Mixon is not expected to have an every down role. But I want to reinforce what Matt said, that 15 to 20 touches is still very much in the range of expectations for Mixon. And 15 to 20 touches against this Miami. Did you see what Sony Michel and James White did last week? And Joe Mixon strikes me as the kind of cat that, like, once he's out there, they're going to have trouble getting him off the field, or otherwise he's not, his performance on a per touch per snap basis is not.
They are not playing
Shut up, Martin.
Yeah, they're not playing Mark Walton over Joe Mixon if Mixon looks healthy and is productive.
Yeah,
I think they're going to try to work him in a little bit like they did Gio, but Mark Walton is not Giovanni Bernard.
No, he's
not. When Giovanni Bernard played 3 weeks in week 3, they didn't even have Mark Walton there. I mean, they were looking for Trey Carson and they brought in Thomas Rawls. So it is going to be entirely dependent on how Mixon feels. I don't think they're going to bring him off the field. They already gave him that extra week to be healthy. I'm not saying that this is a 25 touch day, but that does not scare me. I think we're going to see a little bit of Mark Walton today, but if Mixon is healthy, if he looks good early on, that's not going to be a problem.
Yeah, and it really could easily be like a 12 carries. I mean, what kind of days was Giovanni Bernard having? Like 12 for 60 and 2 touchdowns and like 4 catches for 30. I mean, he can be fine with 15 to 20 touches.
The only way Mark Walton gets to 12 touches is if the Bengals have 75 offensive snaps.
Yeah, which they might against Miami. Poor Miami. So going back to this Houston-Dallas game briefly, Matt, because from a fantasy standpoint, Deshaun Watson and Cam Newton are kind of similar in their fantasy outlooks and how and what can happen. What I'm trying to say is Deshaun Watson, Cam Newton, these guys can create elite fantasy days when the conditions are not optimal for them. A gimpy Cutie, a gimpy Deshaun Watson, Alfred Blue or Buddy Howell leading your running game. The offensive line they have against a Dallas pass rush that is very, very good. And although they haven't been forcing turnovers, they have been getting a lot of sacks. Is this where Deshaun Watson, a la Cam Newton, still has like a 25 or 30 point fantasy day because he's just going to find a way to do it? Or are all these reasons enough for the rational fantasy GM to say, I'm finding another option at quarterback?
So I guess the hinges on one thing that I have to ask Gene, which is Bruce Ellington available if Kiki QT is not?
He's on IR.
Oh, he's on IR. He is on IR. Okay, well, then when you look at it this way, if you're relying on guys like Sammy,
you can't even say his name without laughing.
No. Without my hands are inside some coats when I try to catch the ball. I don't feel really great about that. It becomes a very volatile situation for a quarterback. And especially when you take a look at the fact that David Irvin's coming back this week and he's essentially a defensive end playing defensive tackle when it comes to how he rushes the passer. So it's, that makes it even more of a difficult situation for Watson. But if QT's in there, I mean, if QT's good to go, and we just hear that it was a little tight, and because he had all that time off, they wanted to be extra cautious with him, and we certainly saw a report. It looks like that football you guys put on there at about 12:30 that he's likely to play. He's just going to test it out. Of course, we probably have more cautious updates this morning about him that's driving this, but if he feels ready to go, a lot of the routes that they're going to run with him, I think it's more of an extension of the ground game. So he's a guy that I think you can feel pretty good about getting a high reception total, somewhere between 8 to 10 targets, and maybe getting 7 to 9 catches, and feeling pretty good about what he's going to have to offer, even if he isn't able to open up that throttle all the way and become a big play threat for you right away this week. So yeah, I like Watson's chances a little bit more than what Cam Newton put up so far this year against them. And Newton was 161 yards passing, 58 yards rushing, and a score. I think Watson is capable of having a better day than that. Do I think that he's going to be a 300-yard passer with 50 yards rushing? No, I don't think that's his week this week.
Really, there's a wide range, and you're right that David Irving's suspension is over. He does have a knee thing and didn't make the trip down I-45 to Houston for this game, but it's still their defensive line has been a strength in terms of putting pressure on the quarterback, and we know that Houston's offensive line is not a strength as far as QT goes. And you all know that first thing this morning, I'm scrambling to pull QT out of my lineups left and right. If you have a Traquan Smith, if you have a Cam Meredith, if you have a Jamison Crowder, if you have somebody, Paul Richardson, maybe even Cole Beasley, that you can pivot to if QT. Because the thing is, when you look at this from a fantasy standpoint, QT is, you could be, if he's inactive, obviously you don't want to be holding the bag. But if he's active, another week like last week is in the cards. Similar with the Will Fuller, although I do think that as Gene has laid out, Fuller, just based on the longer term history here, feels between the two, if they're active, Fuller's the more likely one to go out there, test it in the first or second series, and say, I can't, I'm not going to be able to. I'm less concerned about that with Cutie, but I am concerned that he might not be active after the report we got this morning that he is a true game time decision and grouped in with. Go ahead.
And I think that the Traquan Smith, Cam Meredith, Paul Richardson type of decision matrix is perfect, obviously, because of their Monday night games.
Yeah. So
you can kind of wait on QT to see.
Yeah, and if you don't, then I think you probably have to put him on the bench and hope that you put him on the bench for another 9 catch for 100-yard game, and then you can be safe with him going forward. That's rough. Gene, an afternoon game in San Francisco, or Santa Clara to be specific, between Arizona and San Francisco. We've got some more gimpy wide receivers here. We've got Larry Fitzgerald and we've got Marquise Goodwin. We are setting lineups at 1 Eastern today, and we have to project the availability and quality of play for these guys. What do you foresee?
I don't think either one of them are close to being fully healthy. We know what we're getting from Larry Fitzgerald at this point. He's limited. He's going to continue to play. There's no way he's not going to, unless he gets an aggravation such that he just can't stretch his leg out anymore. But we've seen this for 2 weeks now. Fitzgerald, like a number of other wide receivers that we've talked about, is going to go out there and play. Goodwin, I'm not very optimistic about. He's got a hamstring strain in addition to whatever quad issue was there, whether it was a little bit more of a strain than a bruise in there, or a bruise that just took a little bit longer to heal. That leg is not healthy. He left the game multiple times last week, and when he came back, he looked okay, but eventually left and wasn't able to come back. Kyle Shanahan on Friday said that he was without a doubt a game time decision, and kind of turned him 50-50 at best, which is what you would normally think from a questionable tag, right? But it just had the tone of, well, I really don't know. He's got to make some improvement up until game time. Otherwise, we're really not sure what we're going to get out of him. And knowing that he's already kind of been in and out and wasn't able to come back and finish the game comfortably, didn't practice this week fully, and being called a game time decision, he's not healthy. So I think there's a good chance he'll be active, but I don't know that you're going to see him out there for a full complement of snaps. He seems like he's at high risk of an in-game setback where he may have to miss the series, or at least a few snaps here or there. Won't have the usual separation that he'll need. So I would be really unless you don't have any other options, I don't think I'd use Goodwin this week. And then Fitzgerald is, if he catches some of the passes he's dropped over the past couple of weeks, his stat line looks a little bit better, but I don't think he's healthy enough to get double-digit targets.
Let's look a little closer at this game, and we touched on this Thursday night, Matt. There's two sides to this, and you can pick out any name you want, or you can say like, "Nah, I'm looking elsewhere." Because on one side of it, I was impressed with what I saw from Josh Rosen, and that makes me a little more fascinated with Ricky Seals-Jones, a little more fascinated with Christian Kirk, or if we're talking about preemptive waiver wire pickups, even someone like Chad Williams, because Rosen's giving him the opportunity to go up and get the ball, which is a forte of his game as they're trying to build that part of his game into this offense. And even in DFS terms, maybe a David Johnson breakout week, maybe. On the San Francisco side, we've talked about, I've mentioned, like, I've always said, okay, when you start a running back, you're starting the offensive line, or you start a wide receiver, you're starting the quarterback too. But we always should also be thinking about starting the play caller. So if you are putting in a San Francisco player, you're putting Kyle Shanahan in your lineup. And even though CJ Beathard is a limited quarterback, we did see against the Chargers last week especially in the second half, the passing game started to come online. I think George Kittle's an obvious. You're playing him if you have tight end, but you've got Matt Breida, and really quickly, Gene, I'm assuming that we haven't learned anything additional about Breida that can help guide decisions with him this afternoon.
No, I think it's important to be mindful that this doesn't seem that the knee injury, whatever that was, the hyperextension seems to be behind him. That wasn't included on the injury report at all. It's the shoulder that's a concern. So the fact that he's maybe still dealing with aggravations and soreness from his preseason AC sprain, the shoulder sprain, is a little bit of a concern that if he takes a hit on it in the right way, that he may need to come out for a bit. But last week, after the knee hyperextension, he played more snaps, a higher percentage of snaps than he had at any point during the year. Maybe that had something to do with Alfred Morris being banged up a little bit too. But no, nothing from Kyle Shanahan or overnight that would suggest that Breida is not going to be available to go.
So basically what I'm getting at, Matt, is, to make this brief, because I have trouble with that. 2 weeks ago, we would have looked at this game on the schedule and said, I don't want anything to do with that game for fantasy football. After Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt, the way Sam Bradford was playing. Now we're looking at this game and saying, is there anything? Is there something here that you're saying maybe giving it a second look? Kendrick Bourne, if Goodwin is out, I mean, is there players here that you're fascinated with in this matchup?
Only if I'm really having trouble fielding a third wide receiver or a fourth wide receiver in fantasy lineups. And if that's the case, then a lot of these guys are due for 50 to 70-yard days. And I think that that's enough that you can feel like you can start them and get some points and not be upset with yourself with the decision. But if you're looking for someone to have like a 120-yard day or 150-yard day, go down the road. I don't think this is the game for you there, because when you look at it against even who the Cardinals have given up, what they've given up, you can see with the Bears before they figured out that Matt Nagy should use more of the, Tyreek Cohen as Tyreek Hill type of player. You're looking at 30 to 50-yard days out of all those receivers. And then with Seattle, with their offense and trying to figure whatever they're doing, it's the same thing, like 40 to 50-yard days. Even with the Rams, I mean, you had 60 to 80-yard days other than Brandon Cook's 159-yard effort. So looking at the way that they spread the ball around, who those receivers are, what they have going for them, I just don't think and I think you have to understand too that Josh Rosen's play makes the defense slightly better because they're going to be on the field a little bit less, because of the fact that Rosen can actually help stimulate that run game a little more balanced, drive the field a little bit longer. And now now you're in a situation where the defense is a little more fresh. They can also maybe play in situations where they're attacking a little bit more rather than trying to play kind of passive just to protect. So yeah, I'm not extremely optimistic about the 49ers receivers, but if you're looking for a third or fourth guy and it's a kind of a desperation play, Bourne's fine. Certainly Garcon, you can look at him and feel pretty good about that. Obviously Kittle is a must play just because of the rapport that he has with both of those quarterbacks and his ability to win in the middle of the field and outrun people.
And Gene, another thing that might help Arizona's defense this week, the state of the San Francisco offensive line.
Better than I thought on Thursday night. Somehow Joe Staley got back to a full practice. Kyle Shanahan was talking about that in his press conference, and he was in there at 5:30 in the morning doing things that Shanahan doesn't understand, asking for help about cryotherapy and that sort of stuff, trying to find ways to get on there. And he's one of those offensive tackles that, unless he physically can't move, you are going to find a way to get him on the field. And the full practice, I doubt it was close to a full practice on Friday, but at least gives him a chance to play. Everybody else that we were concerned about, both guards, center Weston Richburg and the other tackle, Mike McGlinchey, all got back to practices and look like they're ready to play. None of them are fully healthy. It's kind of like the Jacksonville offensive line. They're all banged up a little bit, but they're all healthy enough to play. And hopefully they can work well enough because they've played together for as long as they have to be, well, at least through the offseason, rather. McGlinchey's a first-round pick, but to be successful through the season. I think Staley is a little bit more questionable than what's being led on, but because of who he is and because of his ability to play through injury, and we've seen him do it in the past, I think he's likely to go. Hopefully all of those 5 players don't miss any time today, but I think, if I were betting on it, I would expect at least one of them to be out now and then during the game as they try to recover from little aggravations getting rolled up on and such.
Gene, because of who he is, we drafted Dalvin Cook in the late first, early second round, and now we have this hamstring issue. It's actually an afternoon game. Minnesota going to Philadelphia, rematch of a big playoff matchup last week. But it sounds like even do we wait around to find out if Cook is active for this one?
Playing. Yeah, he's not playing. He didn't really. A limited Friday practice doesn't mean much here. That was nearly 10 days after not being able to play in the second half of an important game. At that point, almost a week and a half after leaving the game with a hamstring cramp at that point. So we're looking at a 3 to 4 week situation. He probably wasn't healthy enough to play the Thursday prior, 10 days ago. You're looking at these players coming off other injuries, the ACL injury, stabilizing muscles around the knee are important. They already rested him once when it was a little bit close. You would expect him this time to make absolutely certain that he's as healthy as possible. And until we see him go through something resembling a full week of practice, he's not going to play. So they've got him listed. Zimmer said he was going to be listed questionable. We talked about this on Thursday, that he was going to do that regardless of what was happening. But I'm kind of surprised that he hasn't been ruled out yet, but that's all but a formality. He's going to be inactive.
Matt, I know that it's going to be a pretty intense game in Cleveland anytime Baltimore comes to Cleveland. And there's lots of history here, but I have trouble doing this. You probably have much less trouble than I do, separating that emotional layer from our fantasy analysis. And really quickly, Gene, on this one, Hayden Hurst back, and is it kind of a eased back, or maybe we see why they took him in the first round back?
Both. I don't think he's going to get a full complement of snaps, but is there really a player that fits into what Hayden Hurst can do already on that offense? Crabtree is playing out of the slot a little bit. Sometimes you like what Buck Allen can do out of the backfield, but I think Hayden Hurst can fill that sort of pass-catching tight end role much better than anything else that's going on the offense. And Joe Flacco has used that role in the past. So I don't think we're going to see a ton of snaps for Hayden Hurst. But at some point, he's going to get targets. And when they put him in there, they're not going to put him in there just to be a decoy at this point. When he's in there, I think he's going to be a part of the passing progression. So I think I would answer that question both. He may be one of those games where, he's only running 10 to 15 routes, only getting 2 to 3 targets, but ends up with 2 catches and 30 yards and maybe a touchdown.
Yeah, and they've been using the tight ends well. So this one's interesting, Matt, because I think on one hand, Cleveland's defense started the season out well, but we saw last week against Oakland, even the refs helped Oakland a little bit, but they weren't really slowing down what Oakland was doing on offense. And then you have low-key, one of the stories I think that hasn't been given quite enough attention is that Joe Flacco's playing really well. Joe Flacco's playing extremely well. He's healthy. He's got all kinds of targets here. You have this Collins, Allen backfield. And briefly, Gene, no reason to worry about Alex Collins after that midweek blip?
No, that was planned and expected, just maintenance.
Okay, so you got this Collins, Allen backfield. Now you have 4 tight ends, Matt. Of course, you're playing Smokey Brown, and maybe the simple answer to this is this is the week that Smokey Brown has 5 for 170 and 2 touchdowns instead of 3 for 110 and 1 touchdown. Maybe it's a week to play Joe Flacco. Do you have an angle on Baltimore as they go to Cleveland, or will you just would you be seeing so much red that you can't recommend any Baltimore player this week?
No, I mean, I certainly think that Joe Flacco's in line for at least a 250-yard day and a couple of touchdowns. So that's a decent day. I think he does have that 300-yard upside with a few touchdowns as a possibility, but I'm not sure I'm like all in on Smokey Brown. I mean, I certainly think I am in the sense that, yeah, if you start 3 wide receivers, he's at least a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, at least, and he's capable of giving you that top day. But I think they're going to be able to spread this ball around a fair bit. And, I'm going to give Denzel Ward some credit to be able to hang with Smokey Brown, because if he can decently hang with Antonio Brown at certain moments, he's going to be able to do the same with John Brown. So looking at it from this perspective, they're going to spread the ball around. I think Michael Crabtree can be a decent play. Certainly, Smokey Brown's going to be a decent play. And yeah, they're going to be able to get some production out of their tight end position, because the Browns have not been very good at being able to stop the tight end. But you'll also see some of that mitigated with, running back play and what you're going to see from them being used in the passing game. So I would say it's kind of one of those games. To me, it's not like someone's going to stand out and have a huge statistical day, as much as it's going to be that there's going to be 4 to 5 guys who do pretty well, and you're going to feel okay about what they did, but they're not going to be the team where one player becomes your weekly winner.
Well, you're probably right. Although I wonder, this is my parenthetical hunch here. I think Cleveland's defense is running out of gas a little bit, compared to what we saw, say, when they went down to the Superdome in week 2 and really thwarted what the Saints wanted to do. But I do think that Martavis Bryant got free last week and dropped the ball right against Cleveland.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and we're seeing John Brown get those 4 or 5 deep shots every single game, and Flacco's deep accuracy has been good. I wonder.
Yeah, it could very well happen, and I think that's a good point. At the same time, too, there's been a Raider player every week who's done something bad to prevent them. That's
don't chase the phantoms of Raider fantasy.
It's like, because Marshawn Lynch said we're a play away from being in the most explosive offense in the league, and I've chronicled them for the past 2 weeks. And the realist or cynical way of saying it is they've had one guy do something really stupid or bad once a week to prevent them from having a huge play that would have tipped the scales in their favor. And I think that, when you look at that and say, well, it's not so fair on Cleveland, as much as that Oakland could be a lot better. But you're right. I mean, that very well may happen. But at the same time, Baker Mayfield also has had 11 drops last week. There were 11 drops last week to receivers. That's a huge number. I mean, we were talking about Josh Rosen, but we didn't really mention so much about Mayfield in that. And I don't know, maybe Hugh Jackson will wake up this morning and see, number 24, visions of number 24 in his head, and we might see
him
the
ball 24 times.
Give him the ball 24 times, and there might be 240 yards at the end of that.
Yeah, this is what's so much fun about playing DFS. Is it Nick Chubb's week? Is it John Brown's week? Whose week is it? You got about 2 hours left to get in to our contest, partnering here with DraftKings. You can put your beliefs into action. Play for free for a share of $1.7 million with your first deposit of $5 or more, $100,000 to the winner. You draft your lineup and watch the points roll in. Make sure you get all your picks in by 1 p.m. Eastern, about 2 hours from now. Go to dkng.co/footballguys to draft your lineup. dkng.co/footballguys. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for more details.
What's his name? Oh,
yeah. Gene, I think I could ask you, we were talking about Taywan Taylor, and one thing you might want to add to the Taywan Taylor hype train, Gene, is Buffalo's defense has been very good. A key to their defense was their safety play last year, but today they might be having to, not just at cornerback, but at safety, go a little deeper on their depth chart.
Yeah, I think Jordan Poyer is the only healthy safety they have. They elevated somebody from the practice squad. Neither Micah Hyde, whose groin injury did not look comfortable at all. Sometimes you see those pull away from the bone, and have players come back relatively quickly. But I don't think that's likely the case to be with Hyde. I don't think there's any chance he plays today, even though he was listed questionable. Raphael Bush has a shoulder injury. I'm not sure what's up with that. He did not play much last week, did not practice at all this week. There's a chance that they elevated the safety knowing that they'd have Bush available as well. But I think it's Jordan Poyer and whoever else they can put out there today. And both of those injuries, hopefully not Bush, but both of those injuries could be multiple week situations.
Yeah, I believe Matt Waldman would call that Buffalo secondary today fresh fish. And you can get and Gene, I'm going to ask you just a straight up football question here because I'm curious what your take is on this. Speaking of fresh fish, we all know the best place to get fresh fish, one of the best places, the market in Seattle. And I think that they said the last time Seattle was over a touchdown underdog at home was the Beastquake game. So is this, and you love defense, but this is from the Legion of Boom to the Legion of Whom, especially without Earl Thomas. You know, does Dr. Gene appeal to the supernatural and say there's just something in Seattle that they're going to make this game rough, or is this a game that shows the true changing of the guard in NFC West and the Rams just stomp them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I think the home field advantage that the Seahawks have with a loud stadium environment, with all of those, but I don't think this is the second coming of Beastquake 2.0 by any stretch. I think the Rams are playing too well. They've got too many weapons. I don't know how you cover them with a healthy secondary at this point and still stop Todd Gurley. So maybe it's a little bit closer than people think it might be, but you wouldn't expect the Rams to have too much trouble with this game.
The Legion of Whom?
Yeah, I need to find.
The orange Ruffy is green.
Trademark.
Yeah. No, and there was somebody who tweeted that out like a month, 2 months ago, and I need to figure out who it was that first put that because it was beautiful. So yeah, Matt, do you think that the Seahawks are going to give you any reason to switch out of your Chiefs gear and maybe sport some Seattle pride next week?
No, I think the hat's still on the shelf and it's going to stay there. I don't think it's moving. So, you know, it's just going to be one of those deals where they're playing in catch-up mode more than anything, and you just hope.
Well, that's the other thing, right? I mean, find an offensive coordinator that can maximize what Russell Wilson is supposed to be able to do, and then maybe you don't have to worry about the Legion of Whom so much, and you just try to keep up with the Rams versus the other way around.
One would think,
you would think, yeah. We talked about this on Thursday night, Matt. The rational coaching, Brian Schottenheimer. I mean, it's almost the classic assumption of irrational coaching. The way that, and maybe there's a point in the game where they fall behind by 2 or 3 touchdowns, and then Russell Wilson just says, "Okay, I'm taking the wheel of the car again." And Russell Wilson can generate some fantasy stats. Go ahead.
The NFL had a Me Too quarterback movement. I think Andrew Luck and Russell Wilson would be marching right now with hats. So I mean, yeah.
We'll see. And really quickly, speaking of that Kansas City hat, we talked about this somewhat in depth on Thursday night. But for anybody that's with us, because we have raised as of right now 501. We're over 500 now. Wow. And I just have to say it's a testament to our community, to the great work that Dr. Gene and Matt do every week, making people want to check this out. This is fun because having a Sunday morning pregame show is a lot of fun. The marquee matchup of the afternoon, Matt, Jacksonville coming into Kansas City. Should the titanic nature of this matchup change how your approach to either side, as Jacksonville could be in open up the throttle mode on offense and Kansas City has their toughest test yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you look at this and this is going to be a very close game, I believe, but it's going to score probably in the high 20s, low 30s. And what that means is you start anybody against that Kansas City defense. I mean, they're pretty rotten. I mean, they're going to make some timely plays in the secondary in terms of you've got some aggressive defensive backs who can go up and win the ball, so that's not bad. I mean, Murray's playing pretty well, and they have a pass rush, but they cannot defend the run. So TJ Yeldon's probably going to have a big day. You can see Corey Grant maybe even doing something a little bit here and there, but those receivers like D.D. Westbrook and Keelan Cole, those are guys that could generate big plays for you. So they're worthwhile options if you're considering that 49ers team, that 49ers receiving core, and you want a bit more big play option in your lineup. Jaguars are probably the receivers you want to go with this week. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I think that the linebackers for the Jaguars, you look at Miles Jack and Telvin Smith and their ability to defend the middle of the field, that you could see how Travis Kelce gets kind of bottled up again for at least a half. You could see that Patrick Mahomes, where he's been weakest with his accuracy thus far, has been on quick slants or crossing routes or plays in the middle of the field in the shallow range
where he lets the ball go and it's a little bit behind the receiver. I could see how an opportunistic defense with good covered linebackers are able to maybe pick off a couple of passes. So to me, this is the game where Patrick Mahomes throws a couple of interceptions, but still is able to generate enough yardage and touchdowns that he's still a weekly start. I could see him in the range of 280 to 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Kareem Hunt having a pretty good day. So Hunt's going to help carry it, but you see this be like a 28-27 affair, which could be a really exciting game, and just another one where people go, oh, well, Mahomes didn't have his greatest day, but he still played very well.
They found a way to win. Gene, will Sammy Watkins be part of finding a way to win in fantasy lineups today as our parting note here?
I think he's going to play. I don't know if he's going to be a part of finding a way to win necessarily. I think it was good to see him back on Wednesday after just 48 hours after leaving that Monday night game. So he's going to play, but I'm going to leave that question up to you. My gut would say probably not.
It's somebody. Maybe this is Demetrius Harris's week for Kansas City,
or a big play from DeAnthony Thomas, because they could really use Watson in the screen game as that extra running back. But if you're worried about the hamstring at all, then it's kind of like, do you really want to start him even, because is he going to be that effective being able to run after the catch? Because that's how they wanted to use him.
Yeah, so much. The buffet every Sunday. And we appreciate that y'all give us the opportunity to do this. We love hanging out with each other and talking football. We love doing that with you, with our great community. Thank you, everybody, for being part of what we do at Football Guys. And good luck here in week 5. You deserve all the good luck in the world because you're so classy.